So just a brief introduction. Leanne loves technology, has been an early adopter for tech ever since her dad built her first computer for her. For the past several years, Leanne has led research and also sometimes analytics on design and product teams at just small companies that you might have heard of, like Dropbox, Autodesk, New Relic.
Yep.
And yeah. And then directly out of university, Leanne started her career in statistics, what's now, as a statistician, what's now known as a data scientist. Leanne's talk is all about this question that, all of us at sometimes either we are asking ourselves or you see other folks in the company asking the design leads. It's about how do you measure the value of design with UX metrics. So welcome, Leanne Waldal.
Thank you so much, Preet. And thank you, Nadia. So I'm going to walk you through really quickly something that actually you could spend a lot more time digging into. So we're just going to do the high level today around measuring the value of design. I'm the Director of Experience Strategy and Insight at a company called projekt202. And so just to start off, to center me as a human here at this online remote conference, I live in San Francisco. There's our iconic Golden Gate Bridge. My family's up there in the upper left. That's my wife. Me there in the green jacket, my mother-in-law, and my teenage daughter. Down below my teenage daughter are her two very friendly smart rats that she trains. And in the upper right is what we think of as the album band cover for our two cats, Sarah and Simba. And all of these animals are super happy to have us at home right now during this pandemic. And I just wanted to share one thing that I'm really loving while working from home and being at home on the weekends. And every single thing in my life being canceled is watching music streaming online. So last weekend, the Met Opera had their at-home gala, and this musician, when he was singing and playing, I noticed had a statue of Wagner in the background with a mask on. Super appropriate. So where I work is projekt202. projekt202 is an experience-driven consulting and delivery firm, and I'm just going to manage a little Zoom thing here so I can see myself and all my slides. There we go. projekt202 is an American company based in the US. We have offices in 5 different cities. We do strategy, UX design, research, development, marketing, and branding, and we're owned by a company called Amdocs. So let's talk about the why and the what of measuring design. So why would we bother doing this? Well, the argument that I make is that our business partners are looking at numbers like this. And oftentimes in numbers like this, there's absolutely nothing about the human experience. Some people might argue that a net promoter score tells you about the human experience, but I'm very happy to buy anyone a drink and argue that it doesn't. So we start to put the why in. We put in the why there's more people using something or not using something, why they're giving something a certain score by doing research. You can quantify that qualitative research by coming up with a user experience metric that you can then sit at the table and put right next to these metrics that your business partners are looking at. Another reason to measure design is something similar to what Steve mentioned earlier about the difference in perspective between what's important to the bank and what's important to the customer. So here's some research that was done by Forrester about 5 years ago, where companies were saying like, oh yeah, rah, rah, we're providing a great experience for our customers. But when you asked their same customers, only 3% were agreeing. And I think most of us know that that's where we live. This gap here is an opportunity to improve the user experience and understand the user experience of the markets that we serve. So what might you do? I think a good place to start is just to get an overview and learn the standardized measures of user experience, see if any of them fit sort of like what you might want to measure or what you might want to track over time from the users and customers that you have. And I'll give you a really quick overview of those today. The second is once you've gotten an overview of them, think about what matters to you and just start experimenting. You don't have to do this with a lot of other people at first. You can just do it on your own team or on your own just to get a sense and a pulse for what's going on. And once you've figured out, oh yeah, these are the things we want to measure, start tracking that right next to the other analytics that your product partners and your marketing partners and your executives are looking at. And then wait. So like any sort of analytics, you want to sort of track it and benchmark it and see how it does over time. So just start doing it every few months or monthly or quarters and start comparing and see where it goes. And then once you figured out, oh, these are the things we regularly want to measure, make them regular questions in all of your interviews and all the research that you do with your customers and users so that you can start to get that rich data that we get when we do qualitative research. So what are these standard metrics? There are a whole bunch of them, and this is not all of them. Up at the top here, I listed out a bunch of the ones that most people are familiar with, starting with NPS, almost everybody knows about. Some of these others like CES, which is customer effort score, you might be less familiar with, and I'll talk about these others in a couple of slides. And then when I think about measuring the user experience isn't just things that are detailed in usability questions, but it's how do I feel? What's my experience? How am I perceiving the things that I'm experiencing and going through with this product or with this service? So NPS and CSAT and CES are really popular metrics to measure at large organizations. And I'm just going to go over these just in case anybody in this audience isn't familiar with them. NPS is usually a question around how likely would you be to recommend something. I find that this is really useful for measuring the usefulness of free products and some services, but not all. And as I said, I'd be happy to buy anyone a drink and argue about this over Zoom. The next one is customer satisfaction, or CSAT. Usually a question around how would you rate your overall satisfaction with something. Lots of different ways to ask this question. In my opinion, this is really useful in the moment because satisfaction is subjective. We are complex human beings. I might be feeling satisfied with Zoom at one moment and the next moment not. So it's important to realize that the way people answer these questions could relate to where they are at the moment. And then CES, which is customer effort score, is something that is similar to the CSAT and is more about ease instead of satisfaction. So at a lot of companies where NPS and CSAT are already being measured by customer service or sales or product or marketing or some part of the business, a first step that I recommend, and this is not prescriptive, this is just an example, is for you to consider something called NVS, which is net value score. This is more appropriate for B2B companies, but can also be very appropriate for companies that are making products for consumers. So this is looking at something that's internal to the human who's using your product or service, and it's measuring how that product or service provides benefit or value to that individual. So I'm going to dig into this a little deeply and then talk about a few other types of metrics. So one reason why we measure value is because price is what you pay and value is what we get. And value and benefit is often what users are getting out of an experience that we're designing for them. So the way that we measure this is we start with where our partners are. So let's say they already know NPS and CSAT. We leverage their familiarity with it, and we just start asking a new question. You can see at the bottom here, we're measuring it in the same way on a scale of 0 to 10, which is the scale that NPS uses. But instead of asking how likely would you be to recommend, which gives benefit to the business, but not necessarily to me, you ask about how they would rate the value of something in the workflow or the job to be done or whatever they're doing. So a good example in a B2B situation is Outlook. So I've been at companies where I've had to use Outlook for mail. It's not my number one choice in mail product that I use. So if I was asked how likely would I be to recommend it, or how satisfied am I with it, or what's the ease of use, I probably wouldn't rate it very high. But if I was asked how much value does Outlook give me in communicating with my work colleagues, like, oh yeah, like I'm stuck, it's the only thing I can use, and it gives me value there. So the way you calculate net value score is you give them this question on a scale of 0 to 10. And then when you look at all of the 0 through 10s that you get, everything from 0 to 6 is called a detractor. The 7s and 8s are passives, and the promoters are 9s and 10s. Then you look at your whole population of the answers that you got. You figure out what percentage of promoters do I have, what percentage of detractors do I have, and subtract the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. If this looks familiar to you, it's because it's exactly the same way that NPS is calculated. And I have done this at different companies as a way to take people who deeply understand and love NPS and say, how about if we put something else right beside it? Measuring something slightly different, and the results and the way it looks will look the same to you and you'll understand it. A really old and still really highly used user experience metric is called SUS, System Usability Scale. So this was originally developed in the 80s, before internet was something that consumers were using, and it was measuring electronic office systems. And all of these 10 questions are specifically measuring usability. So you can look through these and see it's sort of like different ways to look at how I feel about the usability of a system I'm using. If you use this today, you probably wouldn't use the word system, you'd use the word web application or service or mobile app or something else. I see this used a lot, and I've still used it a lot on a lot of my projects when we want to have sort of like a standard list of things that everybody can agree and align on that we're going to start measuring for our product or service. UMUX is the usability metric for user experience. This metric is a direct reaction to the number of questions here in the system usability scale. So some people thought that 10 questions was way too many to be, or 10 statements was way too many to be asking people to be agreeing and disagreeing with regularly. So they came up with this list of 4 statements. And if you look at these, you can see that these 4 statements are divided between negative and positive. So 2 of these statements are negative, so I'm agreeing or disagreeing with something negative, and 2 of these statements are positive. And for those of us who are minimalists and feel like, oh, 4 statements is even too much, they came up with what they call UMUX Lite, which just focuses on the positive statements in UMUX. All of these you can read more about online, and I'll give you some reference materials at the end. The next one that's a standard measurement that came out even more recently is called SuperQ, which is fun to say. Standardized User Experience Percentile Rank Questionnaire. And here what Jeff Sorrow at Measuring You did, that's an agency that does this sort of user experience benchmarking, is break the things up that we're trying to measure into 4 different groups: usability, loyalty, credibility, and appearance. One thing I like about this is it basically feeds all the birds with one bag of seed. So you've got NPS in there, which is what your company might already care about, what your business partners might care about, or what your team might care about. And you've got a variety of different statements to start measuring the user experience and how people are feeling and what they're thinking about what they're using. Something that's not quite so standard is to think about measuring time perception. So I worked on a design team once where we were looking at a specific workflow, like from here to here, where we realized that it was taking most users, let's just say for the sake of example, 10 minutes. And the goal of changing the design for that experience was to get that from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes. So the engineers, of course, designed a way to measure how much time it took someone to do that workflow in the product. We launched the new feature. They were going to track to see whether or not they were successful, and success was going to be defined by people are doing this workflow in 5 minutes. And what I said was, I'm not sure that a user's perception of time difference from 10 minutes to 5 minutes is going to be noticed. If you think about us as humans and our perception of time, if you're a parent and you have children, and you're watching them grow up, time flies, even though the time that you're measuring then is in years. If you think about when any of us sit in a station and wait for a train or a bus or to get on an airplane, it feels like it takes forever, even though it might only be 10 to 20 minutes. So what we did in this example was when we launched the new feature, when someone finished doing that new workflow with the new design, they were asked to agree or disagree with the statement so that we could start to measure, is the perception of the humans that we're giving this to that we actually made an improvement and that it's actually taking less time, or is it just something that we're seeing in analytics? And lastly, I like to measure feelings. All of us don't always remember exactly what was said to us or what we did, but we always remember how we felt about an experience. And so as a team, sometimes we have goals around how we want people to feel when they use our product or experience our service. And so whatever those feelings are, if you want people to feel successful or confident or that something was helpful to them or they were motivated to take a next step, you can start measuring those feelings in your product by asking them to agree or disagree with a statement like this when they're in the place where you're trying to help them feel happy, delighted, successful, confident, whatever the feeling is. So what does all of this mean for you? I'm going to leave you with a few things to consider for what you could do to get started. The first thing is to just measure what matters to you. Measure what matters to the business, to your team, to your organization, to your market. Make it something that you can eventually act on, that you can follow up with qualitative research to understand better. A good example is that sometimes NPS and CSAT matter a lot, and sometimes they don't matter at all, and they're just something the business is measuring because that's what businesses do. But if as a team you're seeing that what matters to us is confidence, then instead of asking whether or not someone would recommend a product, maybe ask whether or not they feel confident using it and measure that over time. And then because I'm American and I work at a lot of American tech companies, and Americans tend to, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate everything all over the place from 1 to 10, when we are doing this sort of measurement of user experience in other countries, I have learned that it's common in many cultures to be reluctant to give a high or low ratings, and so that an 8 in some countries would be the same as a 10 in the United States. And that in a lot of countries, when I've asked, why would you never rate something a 10, I've heard that only God is a 10. So in these cases, what we do is we normalize the data when we understand how a country or a culture rates things. And then finally, just as lots of people will tell you, and lots of us agree with, metrics doesn't really tell us what to do. It doesn't identify the opportunities, the gaps, the needs, the problems. So we always have to talk with customers. What metrics do is give us a place at the table next to our business partners. So when you think about measuring what matters, which is what I hope you take away from this, start with looking at these sort of standard metrics to just get a sense of what are the things that if I was going to just measure something standard it would be, and then start to think about what matters to your team and your product and your market and your organization. If you'd like to learn more, I mentioned earlier this company called Measuring You. Mentioning them again here because their website has an amazing amount of content to read and learn more about all sorts of different types of user experience metrics. Jeff Sorrow, who started Measuring You, has also written 2 books. They're there on the right, that if you like to read books to learn things, are great resources for learning all the ins and outs of measuring the user experience. And then another excellent book is there on the left called Measuring the User Experience by Tom Tallis. And thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leanne. That was amazing. Yeah, we are, just because we are a little behind on time, I know, as always, there are a lot of questions. Are there ways that folks can still reach out or?
Yeah, if you put it in the Q&A in the speaker channel, I'll check it at the end of the day today because now I'm going back to work.
Amazing. Yes.
You can also DM me on Slack. You can DM me on Slack, you can DM me on Twitter, you can message me on LinkedIn, and you can email me. But I'll just tell you, email is the worst way to get in touch with me. DMs are much better.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for accommodating we went a little late and everything. I know you're working.
No problem. This has been fantastic. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.